Alright, we're a real YouTuber now. This is the craziest book I've ever read. And I guarantee you, it's going to be the craziest book you've ever heard about. I'm not saying it's got the most graphic scenes or that there's a crazy twist at the end. No. The entire conceit of the book is crazy. The entire beginning of the book. This cowlick, that's almost as crazy as this book. So you might be wondering, how did I get this crazy book? I was walking around a convention last year, and there is something called the Science Fiction Outreach Project. They give away free books at conventions. You just come in, they've got these shelves, and they're like, pick a book, take it, it's free. I don't remember what my best friend got, but he grabbed something else, and I was looking for something strange. You know what I mean? I was looking for something weird. Especially something old and weird. Look at these yellow pages. And that book smell? Perfect. So when I pulled it off the shelf and I saw Doomtime, the War of the World Trees, with this thing on the cover, how could I resist? Like, what even is that? And you might be wondering, what even is that? We might find out. We might find out. But of course, like any good book published before, last year, we've got a description on the back that isn't just a bunch of reviews. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm just saying, look at this clean few paragraphs. Let me read it to you. Let me read you the paragraphs that have clinched my fate. It all began when someone tried to push Creed into the flesh pool to be ingested. That's just the first sentence. The assassination failed, but Creed was never the same again, because it launched the cliff dwellers of Creed's colony into a new course of life, which could lead to humanity's re-emergence as Earth's masters. In those far future days, Earth's masters were two trees. Not trees as we know them, but two Everest-high growths, whose sentient roots and fast-growing branches dominated every living thing on the world. Men lived between their arboreal combat. Creed's quest for vengeance knowledge, that is, a hyphenated phrase, is the basis for one of the strangest novels of the future ever written. Who else could have projected it but the author whose vivid imagination produced such thought-variant classics? Thought-variant is also a hyphenated phrase. As The Spinner, Earthchild, Spaceling, and others? So you might be wondering, who wrote this book? Doris Piserchia. Piserchia. Piserchia seems right. Her Wikipedia page is like 2 paragraphs. She's kind of a mystery, but also kind of not. She was born in 1928, passed away only in 2021, so long life, good job. She didn't start publishing books, I think, until like 1966. She's highly admired. Her stories are considered very strange, which, yeah. And she basically didn't publish any books after 1983 because she suddenly had to raise her granddaughter after her daughter died. It's tragic, 2 paragraphs on Wikipedia. But that's all I know. She served in the Navy from 1950 to 1954. So, but yeah, so not a lot that I can really tell you about the author, but let me dig into this book. Now, as the back implies, the first page is literally somebody trying to push Creed into the flesh pool to be ingested. Creed teetered on the brink of the flesh pool, too dazed to resist the shoves of the assassin who puffed and grunted and seemed to grow anxious because his intended victim clung so tenaciously to life. What an excellent opening sentence. I don't know what the flesh pool is. Why is his name Creed? Why is someone trying to kill him? Why is being pushed into the flesh pool a way to assassinate somebody? So, that wasn't it. Creed clung more to an idea than anything else. It crept around in his brain, coming into view, disappearing for a moment, then coming back where he could see it. What was the idea? He couldn't remember, but he clutched it while teetering on the brass rim high above the pool of protoplasm. So they go on to so Doris goes on to describe this flesh pool as a giant bowl of bread dough that had been punched in the middle. 40 feet below the struggling pair, never fully exposed to the sun, it was protected by colored metal wings that reached out to shade it. Thin and moving in a circular motion, the wings caught sun, wind, and atmosphere and directed measured particles downward at deliberate angles. The pool was both a scientific and a natural marvel, expensive to maintain, but done so with care and even love. You might be wondering why there's a flesh pool. So you don't get any of that information until it's kind of relevant. Probably in a chapter or two. The chapters tend to be pretty short. I think all in all there are 27 chapters. Oh my, this last one actually has some pages. 26. There are 26 chapters in about 170 pages. So that tells you. Pretty short chapters. But let me elucidate you a little bit. So Creed, we're gonna do some writing. Creed is our main character. He's our gentleman on the front. I will say it is established in the text that he is 25. That's a rough 25. I get it, buddy. But, so Creed is our main character. He lives in a place called Neo. Neo's the place with the flesh pool. What does the flesh pool do, you might ask? So Creed, he works with the flesh pool. He's also like the head of their council. Anyway, so the flesh pool, what the flesh pool does is it exudes molds, MOLDS, like it exudes the flesh into molds that are basically ready to eat meat. So it'll be like headless, feetless, featherless chickens. It'll be headless, hoofless cows, so on and so forth, for the people of Neo to eat, to consume. No one knows where the bowl or the flesh pool came from. They only know that it provides for them. And if anything touches the flesh pool, it's immediately consumed and absorbed by the flesh pool. That's actually what they do with their dead in Neo, is they toss them into the flesh pool. Yeah. So, in this first chapter, some mysterious figure attempts to push Creed into the flesh pool. They struggle, they end up kind of tumbling down a little bit. And the flesh pool itself is like kind of attacking them. It's kind of aware. It's never fully explored, but it's just there. And that's something I really appreciate about Doris. She doesn't explain anything. I mean, she'll explain like in a couple sentences, like the history, but the people of Neo, the people like Creed, don't really know much about their history. They don't fully know much about Neo, who created it, where it came from, etc. So we and they are both in this strange, blissful ignorance. But as they struggle, Creed and his would-be assassin struggle on the edge of the flesh pool. They tumble down a little bit. There's kind of a rim on the inside. And out of nowhere, the assassin gets a name. Garba. It's never explained how Creed knows his name. Creed doesn't even know how Creed knows his name. But his name is Garba. And Garba, at some point, he kind of falls back, and part of his head and brain gets absorbed into the flesh pool. So he's kind of instantly rendered docile, so to speak, his instant brain damage, and he starts like clinging to Creed because suddenly he doesn't know what he was doing or where he is. And Creed is trying to get them out of the flesh pool, but some of the flesh got between them, so they're, the thing sticking together. Oh, like in Together, right? Their faces are sticking together. And Creed finally, crawls up out of the flesh pool, and at first, all of a sudden, when Creed escapes out of the flesh pool, all of a sudden he's like, what do the doctors know? They're just going to cut us apart. I don't know what to do. And he at first is going to run away from Neo, from the flesh pool, go hide with this guy stuck to his face. I don't know. But suddenly he's like, oh, I don't know why I thought that. Right here. It took him a while to find a phone to the outside, and then it took him longer to lift Garba so that he could stand on his own 2 feet. He called Tedrin. Sitting in the booth with Garba on his lap, he listened to the muffled sounds of machinery and people in the complex. He felt strange. He felt mad. Standing, he shook his head to clear it of fog. What was he doing here anyway? He didn't know anyone named Tedrin. And why would he think medics didn't know anything, or that a big tree in the forest could help him? Swiftly, he hung up the phone, went out into the corridor, and allowed an attendant to find him. So out of nowhere, tons of questions. All right, I'm going to pull out a green. I have multiple markers in my pocket. This one's slightly more green. So Creed, somebody named Garba, tries to kill Creed. And then all of a sudden, Creed knows not only Garba's name, but also Tedrin? Oh, who is this? Question mark. Related to Garba? Maybe? But all we know is Creed instantly wanted to call Tedrin after getting face stuck to Garba. He also knew Garba's name slightly before the phone call part. But this is kind of all we know. We know that there's a big brass bowl with the flesh pool. Technically, we don't know that he lives in a place called Neo yet, but spoiler alert, I guess. But Creed has been, there was an attempted assassination by a guy named Garba, and who is Tedrin? That's where we're at. So in Chapter 2, we learn a little bit more. He goes to the doctor. They say they can cut them apart, but it's not going to be any snap of the fingers. Garba is pretty much, disabled from the brain damage he suffered in the flesh pool, and nobody really wants to take him. There's no place. They can't keep a sick man in the hospital because he's sick in the head and not sick in the body, which, don't even get me started on the politics of that. But then he takes him to green therapy. Now, green therapy, per what I've read, not necessarily what's described right away in the book, is a therapeutic method done to citizens of Neo whenever they're feeling depressed, anxious, anything like that. You basically go into a place where it's full of foliage and leaves and flowers and stuff. But not trees. Be aware. Trees are a whole thing in this book, obviously. But, so he leaves him there at green therapy for a little bit, to see if that'll help. And then he goes to work. He puts on this crazy, in my mind, this big diving suit, and he dives into the flesh pool to clean the brass bowl that the flesh sits in. It's kind of his full-time job, even though he's also on the council, which is the ruling body of Neo. So then he goes home, and at home he has a drunken brother. His brother Drago, something like that. He's a drunk. It's kind of a whole thing. He's a drunk, and he argues with him. He actually tries to throw himself out of their city. So technically, this isn't exactly how it's described, but Neo is a bunch of hexagons on the side of a mountain. So the whole side of the mountain is a sheer cliff face full of hexagonal living spaces. And I assume everything else is more inside the mountain. So Creed lives in one of these apartments. Drago tries to throw himself out of it. He can't. He fails. And Creed worries about him. He also tries to kind of get him to get help. Drago refuses, of course. And then, when they're arguing, Drago says, I want out of here, said Drago. You keep me locked up like a prisoner. He was a slender man with dark hair and soggy eyes. He was 35, 10 years older than Creed. Again, that's a rough 25, buddy. He shaved each morning, no matter how drunk. Sometimes morning for him was early afternoon. Now he tossed a potted plant at a wall mural, kicked an empty fishbowl from its stand, and upended a chair as he made his way to the coaster door. Apparently on the inside, there is a coaster that'll take you up and down throughout Neo, I assume. Again, nothing unessential is explained. You kind of have to assume, you kind of get the vibes, and I love that. I love when a story just throws you right in there. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate a little bit of exposition, especially when it comes to, like, historical events that might be influencing the story, but the history of Neo doesn't really matter, and part of that is, revealed throughout. So, Drago says, unlock this thing or I'll flatten your skull. And Creed says, it isn't locked and you know it. In fact, you lost your key. Then Drago says the interesting thing that I meant to get to, but then I forced you to listen to that other paragraph. Giving him a baleful stare, Drago staggered inside the coaster for a ride to the ground. I want my tree, he said, desperation in his tone. Tedrin said it would save me. Garba, too. They aren't like you. They're my friends. Wait, said Creed, but the machine sighed and dropped him from sight. Drago might be back that day or next week. He might drink himself into oblivion or go to work on the farm 6 kilometers away. So, something's up that Drago happens to know about Tedrin and Garba, and also a tree. He wants his tree. What does that mean? No idea. No idea yet. So then the next day, at the end of the chapter, Creed goes back to Green Therapy, and Lexia, who is the woman who kind of runs Green Therapy, and basically Garba has to come home with him. Nobody wants him, nobody can take care of him, and he's not on any of their records, so he's not a citizen of Neo. Which is crazy because they don't know about any other locations or any other humans. So, mysteries abound. So in Chapter 3, Creed is at his job, and there's apparently a complex of tunnels around / underneath the brass bowl, and he's walking around, and all of a sudden he's being followed, and he's trying to lose the guy, and then the person shoots arrows at him, and forces him deeper into the tunnels, but they don't believe him later on, because he doesn't have any proof that this happened. But then Tree Detail comes to Creed at his apartment, made him get out of bed, ignored his complaint that he had worked the night shift. She walked him to Drago's farm. She, the Tree Detail, we don't know her name yet, but her name is Darva. I keep telling you I don't know where my brother is, Creed said. I'd like to question him about this, said the Detail, whose name was Darva. He may be a drunk, but he knows these things are forbidden. So trees are forbidden. Let's establish that. Where's my blue one? Oh, that one's pink. Alright. Trees forbidden. In Neo. Alright. He may be a drunk, but he knows these things are forbidden. I'm surprised its poison didn't destroy this whole cornfield. She was talking about the tree. It wasn't a tall one, but its trunk was nearly 2 meters in diameter. That's pretty wide for a not very tall tree. Russet in color, so a red tree. It nestled among the corn stalks, looking hideous and stunted. "This is the first one I've ever seen," said Creed. "What does it do? Send rust or something through the soil?" "Something like that. Don't you know? I've had plenty of experience." "How do you get rid of it? How do you think?" So they end up kind of leaving the tree there for now. Darva is asking after Drago, but we're going to make a note here that there's a red tree in the farm. Just a random note about this red tree. But she's asking after Drago so that she can, punish him. But apparently there's a pile of clothing at the base of the tree. And Darva's like, "Is this your brother's?" And Creed's like, to my knowledge, he has never been an exhibitionist. There's some really funny dialogue in this book. I'll do my best to read it when I get to it. So what ends up happening is Creed goes home, and then Drago comes home 3 days later, and he's trying to get him to eat. He's trying to take care of his brother, and Drago won't answer any questions. The tree detail then comes to see him at work the next evening, and this is a fun short little pages, man. Short little bit. The tree detail came to see him at work that evening, insisted upon knowing where Drago had been while on his drinking vacation. "I don't know. I've never known. I used to try to follow him when he went off to get drunk, but he lost me every time." "Why do you ask?" "I posted a guard near that tree." "So," said Creed, "your brother climbed out of it yesterday morning, put on the clothes you left lying in the field, and went away." "He's done stranger things than that while under the influence." "I don't think you understand. The guard was there all the time. Your brother never climbed into the tree. He only climbed down out of it." So in this next chapter, we get a little more into it. So I'm going to introduce you to two other characters that live in Neo. Technically, I should put Lexia up there because I already mentioned her. But Lexia works at Green Therapy. A woman. There's not a lot of character development for her yet. There's also, so Creed is on the council along with a guy named Savenier, and Pantori. Pantori. This guy. Anyway, so Creed gets really curious about what's in those tunnels that he had gotten forced into when somebody started shooting arrows at him and forced him down into the tunnels. So he goes down into the caverns, and he ends up finding a secret mold. Underneath the brass bowl, the molds that the flesh pool creates cows and pigs and sheep and chickens and stuff. There's a secret mold down there. At the end of the cavern, protected by darkness and rocky stalks, was a stone post supporting a mold. There was a plug in the trough where it exited from the wall, a black and spongy wad that came away easily when he tugged on it. Immediately, living protoplasm, the living flesh pool, bulged through the gap, filled the trough, bubbled and gurgled upward into the post, and filled the mold on top of it. After an hour of standing and watching, he went away. Whatever was growing there in the mold would need time. He would come back later and see what he had created. Everything's going to work out perfectly, I'm sure. So as he's coming out, Pantori has a crazy arc in this book. Pantori comes out, and he kind of sucks. He starts bullying the crap out of Creed. He's a good 15 kilos heavier than Creed, which is pretty significant. He's a big guy. And he threatens him. He's like, "Nobody loves you. You're going to die alone." That kind of normal stuff you say to people. And Creed complains to Savenier about this, and Savenger's like, "Meh, he's afraid of you. He's really stupid, hangs with a stupid crowd. He's always following me. Maybe I'll start carrying a club." Scavenger doesn't want to hear about the mold that Creed found. Creed tried to tell him about it in the previous chapter, and Scavenger was like, you know I have claustrophobia. Don't talk to me about caves. Which, I love it. I love that. So, Creed goes back, and let me tell you what he created. It was a slender little pink beast, about 6 centimeters long, with a skinny tail, long snout, and pink eyes. Creed saw it loping across the rye field that evening as the sun was going down. Gotta say, Creed's probably got crazy good eyes, because if something is 6 centimeters long and you can see it in a field, those are some good eyes. But let's make a note here. Little pink beast. Well, pink beast. You might be wondering why I don't put the pink beast in the pink. That's because the pink is meant to be red, associated with the red tree. And you might be wondering why Tedrin's in green. Oh my god. We're about to find that out. So, Creed goes back to green therapy. He talks to Lexia, and he's, everything was, let's see. Green therapy was encased in high walls of shiny ivy. The compound undulated like a green sea, an impression created by tall grass blown in an artificial breeze. It was fed extra vitamins to make it outdo its ordinary counterpart on the outside. There were berry bushes, dwarf peach shrubs, pear vines, and gardens of flowers. The sky was bombarded with chemicals to make it a serene blue, and through the undergrowth ran a silvery brook that made a bubbling, chortling sound. How nice. What a lovely place to have therapy. Am I right? Am I right? Here's my sponsor, Green Therapy. Go outside. The recorder that produced the noise was concealed in a hollow rock, so the stream itself doesn't even make a sound. Why the stream with running water couldn't just run? Everything was green. Everything green was extremely green, and had a strange effect upon Creed. It made him itch and fidget. So he gets allergic. And Lexia's like, no one's allergic to green therapy. And he goes, it might be that tree over there by the brook. You must be out of your mind. There are no trees. It's hiding behind some tall grass. Perhaps if you dispensed with fewer vitamins. It was an odd tree. Green of foliage, fat of trunk, and covered with glittering green bark. I like it, said Creed. How do you feel about it? I don't know. I'm not sure. That's Lexia. You'll have to notify tree detail. Naturally. But in the meantime, it's educational to observe it. Creed stepped close enough to the tree to smell its interesting odor. Tedrin, is that you? He says to the tree. Who are you talking to, said Lexia. I seriously think you could use some therapy. So they end up chatting a little bit. He kind of explains what he did in the previous chapter, where he's like, I was trying to make a phone call to this tree named Tedrin. And Lexia says, you're cracked. I'll put your name on the waiting list for admission. You're due for the treatment. In this book, they use the word cracked to mean having some mental issues, maybe kind of a word for crazy. The next chapter starts with these two sentences. By the end of the week, a dozen curled and scorched corpses had been dropped into the life pool. The twirlies had been busy. So you might be wondering, what's a twirly? Been no mention of a twirly prior to this. Actually, fun fact for you, that little pink beast, I really got to find a stand for these markers so I can pick the right one out of my pocket at the right time. This is a twirly. Yeah. Maybe it's spelled with a Y when it's singular. Anyway, the little pink beast that he released from the mold is called a twirly. I'm going to explain to you now what twirlies do, just because it'll make things make a little more sense as we go along. Which, when you're reading it, you don't get any of this. So just know that I'm doing you a favor. So a little twirly, those little 6 centimeter guys, they will spin, they'll chase their tail super, super fast, and basically start fire. And then they will wrap around you, spinning, until you burn/suffocate to death. And then they just do that. That's kind of like their thing. Do I understand why? Not at all. Do I understand the purpose for that? No, no, no. Why would the flesh pool make it? Shh. Don't ask questions. The rest of this chapter, it's got some good dialogue. So Creed, after the twirlies had been busy, the council meets to kind of discuss what to do about it, because Creed is like, yeah, it came from this crazy mold in the cavern, and everybody both believes him, but they don't want to go see it. Two more people who are on the council with Creed, Wallaconset, an E.T., Wallaconset, yeah, and Divida. Divida's a lady, Wallaconset, I think, is another guy. So they're all on the council, and Creed is like, we got to get rid of these twirlies, which apparently there's several of them now. They've been continually reproduced in that mold in the cavern, and many of them want to gun them down, but not Divida. She wants one for experimentation. One of my favorite little bits here, Drago ends up being in one of his jealous moods, blah, blah, blah. They have a nice little conversation. I like this paragraph. "You have courage," he said to Creed. "I have none. I know I swore it off, but times are hard. A twirly chased me through the farm today. I barely escaped with my life. I hate this place. Surely there's something else in the universe." "Why don't you go find out?" says Creed. "You want to be rid of me. Our parents loved me the most. You're such a funny-looking clod with that orange hair. You look like a walking carrot." It's a rough 25. So, he threatens him. Then they go, Creed goes back to work, and Divida makes him describe the mold in detail, and she says, "I believe I read about something in the sort in the library. It was a book of mythology short stories. This isn't a myth." And I love this sentence. "Neither is any truth, but we can't help where people stash things, can we?" says Divida. "I'm going to catch a twirly with a net. We won't be able to defend ourselves against them if we don't learn everything there is to know about them." "You're supposed to catch bugs with a net." "I have a theory that the twirly is only dangerous when it's twirling. I'll catch one while it's loping about on 4 legs. And if it doesn't?" She didn't reply, and Creed walked away and out of the complex. I don't know why, but I'm a big fan of, I have a theory that the twirly is only dangerous when it's twirling. Garba throws a little fit. Then, the part that really got to me. We are 23 pages in. And this is the part where you know the book's going its own way. A twirly chased him into Tedrin. He was at green therapy, hunting for Lexia, when the air filled with a sublime melody, and then the whirling dervish sped over the high wall of ivy and made a beeline toward him. He had been told it wasn't possible to outrun a twirly, but a person might have a chance if he fell flat. Creed couldn't do that in a thick flower bed, so the next best thing was to try to reach the green tree. Was it instinct, or some kind of racial memory that made him strip? He wasn't wearing enough to make much difference, except to Tedrin, who only appreciated nudes. Same, bro. The predator sang with fiendish anticipation, and Creed jumped naked into Tedrin's bosom. He left all his problems behind. Now, you're probably imagining, I'm diving in and, I'm in his bosom. I'm being held by these tree... No. He went in to the tree. It's called dipping. It's a whole thing in this book. Notice on the cover, by the way, red tree, green tree, some mountains in between. That's going to come back later. But anyway, so here we go. Expecting to crouch and conceal himself in the gnarly crevices, he was surprised to find himself sinking down into the tree. not actually going very far, but drifting from human to something inexplicable. Tedrin had no gender or personality, and no abilities such as speech, reason, compassion, or ambition, or so went Creed's thoughts. "If you say so," said the tree, "I'm patient and willing to wait while you make your emotional adjustment to the situation." The growth couldn't have been around for millions of years, though he claimed otherwise. He wasn't relative to the cedar, but he said he was one of those botanical curiosities that didn't even grow cones until it was at least 50 years old. What the tree seemed best at was imparting rest and pleasure to the weary and jaded. Creed felt rejuvenated and at peace with the universe. He felt omnipotent and immortal. His pulse slowed, his heartbeat dropped to 30 thumps a minute, his personality swelled and transcended gravity as he floated around inside the tree like a buoyant swimmer. He felt happy and filled with pleasure. He loved everyone and had an inclination to poke his thumb in his mouth. Sounds like an ecstasy trip, honestly. Later, when he squeezed from the tree like pasta from a tube, the twirly was gone and night had fallen. With a sense of astonishment, he realized hours had passed while he drifted inside Tedrin. It had seemed like minutes. "I'm learning a little history," he said to Scavenger the next day. "How?" "From an old expert." "I assume you're talking about a library book, since there are no living, breathing experts." "Do trees breathe?" Divida interrupted their conversation by coming around with a twirly she had caught in a rabbit lure. "Good job, Divida, you did it." The creature was confined in a small box. "It hasn't enough space to twirl," she said. "You're lucky you didn't get your hair singed," said Creed. "What does it eat?" "Sunflower seeds." "If I didn't know better, I'd say it was a fowl. It doesn't seem too brainy in this form. Maybe it's more intelligent when it's being a tornado." So in Chapter 6, it's established that Creed and Lexia are both dipping into Tedrin kind of regularly. They ask if they feel like addicts or whatever. But at some point, apparently, Tedrin says that red trees are inferior to green ones. And Lexia's like, what does that even mean? And Creed's like, "I'll show you." So he takes Lexia out to Drago's farm, where that red tree was, and Darva, the tree detail, is still out there. Oh, I didn't write Darva's name down. How dare I? Oh, hang on. I swear that blue one just goes to the bottom of the pocket somehow. There's also Darva, tree detail. I don't know why I'm putting her title and no one else's, but I did. So they go out to Drago's farm, and Darva's there, guarding that red tree, and she won't let anybody get near it. She won't let anybody touch it. She keeps claiming that she's going to destroy it, but the vibes are definitely that she's kind of protecting it. Creed then confronts his brother later on about climbing trees and dipping into the red tree, and Drago is like, "You're cracked. I don't know what you're talking about." So Creed, given that the tree, Tedrin, has been making him feel really good and everything, he decides to take Garba, who's still, messed up in the head. He decides to take him over to Tedrin in green therapy. So he takes Garba in, Garba dips, and he basically gets healed. And as soon as he is healed, as soon as he emerges, he attacks Creed again. "Fiend!" cried Garba, trying another swing with his weapon. He grabbed a fallen limb from the tree. Creed hit him with a rock. Not enough to damage the new flesh on the back of his head, but just enough to drain some rage from him. Tedrin had healed his wound. "I was hoping he'd do something for you," said Creed. "Too bad he didn't cure your attitude." "What did I ever do to you?" Garba only glared at him. "Why are you trying to kill me?" demanded Creed, lowering the rock. Garba butted him in the stomach and ran out of green therapy. He headed across the rye field toward the lakes. And that's pretty much it. He runs away. A bunch of other people come running toward Tedrin, throwing off their clothes, diving in. Creed goes back to the red tree to see, because he wants to destroy it. He doesn't know what's going on with these trees, but he's starting to get suspicious that something's going on. Darva is like, break a leg, no one touches the tree until I decide how to destroy it. And not only this one, but I hear there's another in green therapy that needs killing. Creed leaned on the fence and stared at the red tree. All of a sudden, a naked man came up out of its lap like Neptune breaking surface. All he lacked was a trident. But he held a bow and arrow and tried to shoot Krieg. Also, it's Drago. Drago emerges from the red tree, tries to shoot Creed with a bow and arrow, and then he jumps down out of the tree and runs away. Why? We don't know yet. But Drago ends up coming back and trying to get to the red tree. This is a small scene that doesn't actually include Creed. But Drago comes back and Darva's like, fuck off. You're not getting in. You're not going to see the tree. And she demands a password. And Drago says, brainless twerp, crackpot, even if I knew a password, I wouldn't give it to you. What do you think this is, a game? Open up or I'll kick the gate down. She wouldn't, and so he did. Staggering away, he said over his shoulder, next time, try something substantial. So he kicks the gate down, and she just kind of lets him? I don't know. But somebody hops over the collapsed fence after him and walks up to the red tree. And says, hi, Crake. Crake. I've seen you in my dreams. Mind if I join you? So this red tree is named Crake. Crake and Tedrin. I love all of the names in this book because some of them are things you've kind of heard before and they're all things that could be names. But also, Garba really gets me. Walakanset. There's no name in this book like this one. Walakanset it's a great name. So the next chapter, chapter 7, is, again, they're all very short. In this one, Creed, he tries to talk to the council about stuff, but they aren't doing anything. Drago tries to claim that he didn't do anything. He would never shoot a bow and arrow at his brother. And then Twirly attacks Creed in the field. He survives. He gets burned, but he survives. And then more twirlies were being manufactured because the plug in the pipe that Creed had made had been stolen. So more and more of them are being unleashed into this area. Pantori finally hits Creed. He doesn't like Creed, and he finally hits him. He's like, I'm going to give you a bad time, said the big man. Eventually you'll leave and find another place to live. You're not wanted around here. Creed ends up hitting him with a rock and knocking him out one hit, so that's fun. Also, it's established that I was completely wrong, and I apologize. This book erases itself from my memory and also haunts me. It's fascinating. Walakanset is a large, muscular woman with big hands and white hair. She wasn't old. Her hair was just white. I love that. I love that description. Excellent. And then Creed goes to the hospital to get some, ointment and stuff for his burns, and finds out that his brother has been abducting people from the hospital to take them out to the tree. So in Chapter 8, Creed tries to talk to Tedrin about everything that's going on. He talks to Lexia about it, but she's like, about basically everything that's going on. And Tedrin keeps advising Creed and other people to destroy the red trees. Tedrin is like, fuck all those red trees, am I right? You should cut them all down. And at first he's like, there's just that one. And then he's like, actually, there's another one. And then, after a while, he finally admitted there are about 5,000 russet trees within a radius of 100 miles. So, clearly the red tree and the green tree don't get along. But for some reason, the trees hate each other, and they're trying to manipulate humans into doing their bidding, which they seem to have a lot of influence over humans, especially when they are dipping. Just sinking into the tree. Again, what? I love it, though, because that's crazy. Walla Consett is at some point guarding that secret chamber with the twirly mold, and somebody steals the next plug they make to try and plug it up so that no more twirlies get made. But Creed is realizing that we have no president, no governor, no boss, and that's what's wrong with this country. Which really, it's like a city on a mountain, but whatever. He decides that he has a more permanent solution to the twirly problem, and he goes to put on his diving suit so that he can dive into the living flesh, and he finds a hole, a big hole, and is like, okay, that's bad, because obviously it'll get in and absorb him, and he'll die. So he ends up going and getting a different suit, and that one's got a smaller hole. And then every suit that he's got has holes in it. So he ends up having to go get a brand new suit that has no holes, and he goes down there with a big, like, it just basically like a spike, a big thing to plug holes, and he looks for the hole in the area where he knows that the secret mold must be, but there's a bunch of holes in the bowl. So he ends up plugging one hole, and spoiler alert, it ends up being the wrong hole for a little bit, but he ends up coming back later and trying again. He basically tries until he finds the right hole and plugs it so that no more twirlies get made. That doesn't happen in this chapter. I think it happens in a couple chapters. It mentions, hey, by the way, he finally found the right hole. So the next chapter introduces another thing that I think it might have been mentioned slightly earlier in the text, but this is kind of when you really know it. So, because they live in these open holes on the side of a mountain, I motion like this is somehow illustrative of that, they have these things called bug snappers that live on their porches and eat bugs. When I first heard about it, like the very first time I read it last year, because I was at the convention and there were times I had to wait for stuff, so I would sit and read this bonkers text. I thought it was like a machine, but no, it's like a bird. It's like a bird thing that snaps the bugs up. So, at the beginning of this chapter, a twirly decides to try and come in through Creed's porch, and the bug snapper flies into the tornado, disrupts the twirling, and snaps up that twirly. So Creed ends up basically keeping his bug snapper on a little leash and bringing her around with him. Her name is Avenger, by the way. Her name is Avenger. And so Crake, the red tree, ended up getting cut down. Somebody attacked it. Nobody knows who. Darva's really upset about it. Creed is trying to make sure it doesn't regrow because it's trying to grow again. And as soon as he gets close to it, Darva, who now also has a bow and arrow, tells him it threatens to shoot him, and he's like, "Would you really? I'm normally peaceable. In fact, I'm always that way, but at the moment, I'm not. I feel protective toward that tree. Report me if you like, only get out of my territory." So Darva's now fully protecting that tree. At the next council meeting, Creed is trying to discuss, trying to point out that in the minutes from the last meeting, it never got mentioned the stuff they actually talked about. So it turns out somehow the history, the previous things they were talking about, is being edited. They had talked about Tedrin and Crake and the Twirlies, but none of that got mentioned when they read the minutes from the last meeting. Now, Pantori is like, "We aren't here to write history. You haven't been recognized," Walla Consett said to him. So this is a running gag. Every time there's a council meeting and Pantori tries to talk, whoever's presiding over the meeting is like, "You haven't been recognized," so tells him to shut up. And it starts driving Pantori crazy, which I don't really blame him. But, obviously I'm not super keen on him being violent about it. But it is, it is established that Lexia knows that Creed is the one who secretly cut down Craig. It is also, one second. Anyway, it's also acknowledged that he is trying to get rid of Tedrin. Apparently Tedrin keeps trying to, like, make little sproutlings elsewhere in the green therapy, and he keeps cutting them down because Creed knows something is up with these trees. He knows there's something nefarious going on. I mean, probably because people keep trying to assassinate him. But nobody else seems to realize it. Lexia is like, by the way, I know you cut down Craig, but you better not do it to my tree. And he's like, your tree? And she's like, Tedrin belongs to everyone. So things are a little weird. But what he ends up doing is he secretly takes some of the living flesh and he'll put it on the trees and they'll like wither and die. Because that's kind of what the living flesh does. It like absorbs stuff. And then right at the end of the chapter, Pantori jumps him, twists his arm until it pops out of the socket, and then Creed's in the hospital for 3 days, and the only punishment Pantori gets is being sent to green therapy. So in chapter 10, you find out that Divida is the one who kept trying to unplug that twirly mold. She said she was doing it for her curiosity, but whatever. Creed isn't worried about it, though, because he finally plugged it from the inside, so no more twirlies will get made. Then, it's not super relevant, but Savinger's wife kind of left him, and not because she was, like, with somebody else, but it doesn't really matter. The part that matters, that I really love the line, we should have had babies. Savinger said. Creed gets his wife to end up coming back to him because she was just like, the world's ending. Why would I waste my time, feeling happy? I don't know. It was something like that. But Savinger says, we should have had children, he said to Creed. I don't think this has a thing to do with the lack of babies. If you want my advice, keep her away from trees. There aren't any now that Tedrin and Craig are down. And this line, I love this line from Creed. When I see my brother staggering, I never question if he found a bottle somewhere. I think that's a pretty solid line regarding, addiction, ironically. What ends up happening is, Creed goes looking for a tree, because he knows there's got to be one, and he thinks that Tana, Savinger's wife, Tana, T-A-N-N-A, which, just because I'm writing everything else down, Tana... There we go. So Creed goes looking for a tree, and he brings Avenger along on her little flying leash, and he ends up finding I believe it's a Tedrin. He came across a nest of trees, 3 large reds and a green, and he goes to the green one. So he goes to the Tedrin. Spoiler alert, all the red trees are Craig. All the green trees are Tedrin. That's what he finds out. But he goes dipping into the green tree with Avenger. He brings her along. And something about having her along, something about having that beast, something about having Avenger along forces the tree to, like, tell the truth. It forces the tree, it, like, compels it to speak honestly. So, this is impossible, said Creed. You can't be Tedrin, too. Can't you get rid of that beast? And then Creed describes it being as different because Tedrin can't, like, get into his head the same way because Avenger is there. So he starts asking questions. Trees always communicate with one another, and I didn't like your cutting one of us down. Oh yes, we know it was you, Creed. The fact you didn't know you were doing us a favor is obvious. Humans scarcely ever do trees favors. Is that so? Say, why aren't you picking my brains? The other tree did. It's that bird you brought along. That thing is distracting me. Do you love human beings? No trees love humans. Stop asking me such things. I don't want to answer questions like that. Talk about mundane subjects. Why are the trees just now making themselves known? You've been around a long time. We're active in cycles. It's time now for another move. It's Doomtime. It's Doomtime. Oh, I didn't want to say that. Don't make me anymore. Stop, stop. It's that bird. You mentioned a major growth. What does that mean? The father. Tedrin. Where is he? I don't know. I lost contact long ago because so many of us were destroyed. Trees have to be within a certain distance of one another to communicate. And then Avenger ends up pulling Creed out of Tedrin, pulling Creed out of the tree. And then in vengeance, Creed ends up attacking Pantori again, knocking him out with like basically chloroform. What does he call it? He says he ends up attacking Pantori. Pantori had been to see Darva and was whistling a carefree tune as he walked past the niche where Creed was waiting for him. An arm came from behind to grab him and hold him steady for a moment while a rag saturated with anaric fluid was pressed over his nose. Anyway, it knocks him out, and then Divida and Creed put him in a suit, take him down. Well, Creed does. Divida is just kind of there. And Creed takes Pantori down into the living flesh and anchors him to this, like, hook in the middle of the bottom of the brass bowl. And he hooks him in such a way where Pantori will have to dislocate his own shoulder to escape. Just to be a dick, I guess. I mean, I know it's vengeance because Pantori did that to him, but I just think it's pretty funny that he's like, oh, you popped my arm out of its socket? I'm going to put you in a claustrophobic nightmare situation. So we're in chapter 11. One thing I will say I forgot to mention in chapter 10 is that there's a yearly explorer who's supposed to like go out and see if there's anything beyond the boundaries of Neo, and they never come back. Just in case that's relevant, totally is not something I wanted to mention because it becomes relevant in this chapter. Anyway, so Creed ends up going to interrogate a red tree next, one of the Crakes. And he takes Avenger along, of course, because obviously that's the only way to make sure that they tell the truth. And he takes Avenger in, and he basically asks, like, you know, so Crake is uncomfortable. Why did you bring that animal with you who gave you permission to invade me with an alien life form? Meaning, I'm not alien, Creed said. To a lesser extent. Oh, I didn't mean to say that. So, you know, Crake admits that the addiction to dipping is how they, like, gained ascendancy over the human race, because they become addicted to dipping, and trees are the dominant life form on this planet. Avenger eventually, you know, escapes. Creed ends up killing that tree. Creed also, out of nowhere, I will say, Creed and Lexia have spent a lot of time together because he keeps going to green therapy, but there has been no full, like, dialogue or anything, so it's I guess this comes out of nowhere, but it's like, Creed told Lexia he wouldn't mind marrying, but there was a matter of his brother who wasn't fit to live with. Alright. They end up, what ends up happening is Drago tries to dip into a green tree somewhere down by the creek, and he gets stuck kind of at the waist because it's so cold. And so what ends up happening is they leave him there. He, you know, somebody is there to, like, feed him and take care of him. But then the weather gets so bad that he gets really sick. He gets, like, pneumonia. And so what they do is they build a fire at the base of the tree to warm the tree up so that he can pull himself out. But then that inspires everybody to go warm up all the trees so that they can go dipping again. And what ends up happening is Jurgen, a new name, somebody I didn't mention before, Jurgen was the explorer that I totally mentioned when that was mentioned in the text, and ends up coming back. And Jurgen lets them know that invaders are coming to Neo. Somebody is trying, you know, a group is going to come attack attack Neo. And the council meets. Pantori gets told he's not being recognized several times, but they're trying to decide what to do about the big group that's coming supposedly to attack Neo. And Creed ends up... the law is plain, said Creed. In the event of war, I'm in charge. If you don't intend to follow me, say so now and I'll step down. Nobody ends up saying so. He appoints Jurgen, commander of the Southern Army, and Pantori, the like leader of the Northern Army or something, and they go to drum up their own troops. In the next chapter, there's sort of a weird compulsion about people keep telling Creed the truth. I don't know. There's a lot of moments that happen in this book that don't lead into anything. They just kind of happen, which there's nothing wrong with that. But so he ends up going into Crake and trying to decide, what, why do people, why are people continuing to attack me? But Crake tries to read his mind instead. He ends up, he's trying to get information out of Creed's mind, but of course he brought Avenger with him, so he can't read his mind. Garba keeps trying to sneak out of the city, which I don't know why they don't let him. He hasn't really appeared since he ran away from green therapy. The next situation is that the invaders arrive. So 260 invaders trudged across the field and stopped to gaze up at Neo inside of the cliff wall. What ends up Pantori Pantori was angry because he had been ordered to ask questions first and shoot later. So there's this shaggy married couple, that is what it says, a shaggy married couple led these invaders, and there has to be more to your story than that, Creed said in the council room. It isn't satisfying to hear you say that you're just nomads who like to wander. So it turns out that Guro and Terena, I'll put them down here, you can see that. Guro and Terena lead this little group of people, and they were looking for Abul. I'm going to put that way up here. I guess I could have put Garba closer to anything. Anyway, Abul. Now, Abul is a legendary city. And Guro and Terena explain that Abul, which I realize now, you can't see. Anyway, so while I rewrite this, I'll explain. Abul is a legendary city of plenty. It's like a utopia. It's like a human haven. Abul. Now, the only other time we've heard the word Abul previously in the book, as far as I remember, is when Garba very first attacks Creed. On the very first page of the story, he yells, Abul! And apparently Abul is also that secret idea that Creed was holding on to as he was attacked. So, apparently Guro and Terena believe that Neo is Abul. What does that mean going forward? We don't know yet. Creed ends up asking a green tree, a Tedrin, more about Garba, and all we know is that Garba is from a long way away. You learn a little bit of the history that there was a big war with trees and humans destroyed a bunch of trees, but then the trees it's not a lot of it's not a lot of super relevant information. But what ends up happening is Guro and Terena and their people kind of like get to live in Neo for a little bit. Creed does threaten them to like be like, be respectful of our space or whatever. But yeah, so there's that. Alright, so chapter 13. This is where we finally kind of expand the world. So what ends up happening is, out of nowhere, there's like an alarm that goes off around the Brass Bowl Living Flesh Pool complex. They don't know where it's coming from. Divida is like, I can't find it. There's never been this alarm before. And what ends up happening is these creatures called Kicks, Kikks, which are apparently naturally occurring creatures. It looks like ricks. Whatever, it doesn't matter. A kick was a long-tailed, furred animal less than half a meter long, weighing approximately 7 kilos. It wasn't known if they were good to eat. They lived in the fields, burrowing in winter and staying topside in warmer weather, hunting for mice and moles and staying away from people. On the morning of Garba's escape, so Garba also escapes. No real big deal in my opinion, given he wasn't really in the story for a minute there. The Kicks heeded the lure of the siren of Neo. So what ends up happening is the flesh pool had gotten so low because people weren't dying because they keep dipping and being healed, that this siren goes off and calls a fuck ton of Kicks to just suicide into the flesh bowl. Until it fills back up enough to be, at minimum, at max capacity. I don't know, man. I love that that's just a thing that happens. So what ends up happening is Creed tries to talk to the council about, like, going out and figuring out what's going on, because they've been living this basically brainless existence in Neo, being cared for by the flesh pool and all of that stuff. And so Creed ends up deciding to leave. He knows that there are people out there who are looking for them because this group just showed up thinking that Neo is a bull. And it's, he's worried about it. So he decides to leave. So he goes out across the fields outside of Neo, and he takes Avenger. He takes Avenger along, not on a leash, but she is trained to follow him without being on a leash. But she's flying, she's catching bugs. She's like ready to help him go dipping if he wants to. And Creed is also doing it to go after Garba. So what he ends up doing is he comes to this huge lake. There's a bunch of different lakes, and he makes a raft and he starts crossing the lakes. And after he crosses enough at the far shore of the last lake, he finds dozens of rafts and boats, evidence of the explorers who had left Neo never to return. Leaving the lakes behind, he traveled across a broad gully beyond which were green acreage and miles of high rocks. He makes a camp in a culvert. The next day, so there's this rock maze, and he takes a spool of, like, basically string of fine cord, and he starts exploring the rock maze. But he ends up losing Avenger in the rock maze, and somebody ends up ruining his string, so he gets lost in the rock maze, and he can't really find his way backward because something about the light makes it seem like there's a giant high wall of rocks and he can't get past it. And he finally ends up he continues going west. That's the whole direction that he's going. And what he ends up doing is he finds a huge tree. And he doesn't want to go dipping without an animal. So he ends up trapping a kick. One of these little fuzzy, in my mind, they look like ferrets. They look like oh god, what is it called? That Pokemon that's basically a ferret. I'm sure it's called like ferret. It's been way too long since I played Pokemon. I'm sorry, for shame. Um, but he ends up dipping into a green tree, a Tedrin, and he ends up, of course, asking questions of it. What I can't understand is why all green trees seem to have the same personality, like father, like son. Um, he asks why they heal people. It says it's more a question of an issue of why we do it. Or he asks how they heal people, and Tedrin says it's more a question of why we do it. Who wants to be intimate with imperfection? So they heal people only for their own sakes. And Creed tries to ask the Tedrin about a bull. He claims that it's folk tales. And then the Tedrin explains that to the west is where the masters dwell. He dips into another tree with the kick, and the kick keeps coming back. Its name is Glutton. His kick's name is Glutton. Oh, I didn't. So there's Avenger, who is the bug snapper, and Glutton, who is Creed's kick. She keeps coming back to him, and she enjoys the pleasure of dipping as well. So he continues west. He just continues westward. And then chapter 14 does like the beginning of the book, just starts without fully explaining. Tedrin and Crake believed they were the rulers of the world. They weren't insignificant little twigs of 20, 30, or even 100 meters high, but had a height of many kilometers. Dwelling on a dusty plain in the center of the western continent, they dwarfed everything but some clouds that were too far away to matter. The two patriarchs had diameters of hundreds of meters and roots that boasted of a firm hold on the planet's innards. Sometimes a person kilometers or even continents away might discover an unusually strong tendril poking out of a rock or trailing serpentinely along a gully. Walking around one of the trees was an activity that took days. They grew fairly close together, actual content being avoided due to a granite wall rearing between them. In the past, someone had possessed the foresight to realize that a man with two masters couldn't serve both if it took him forever to get from one to the other. Going around the rock wall was no speedy task, so he bored or carved small doorways in the wall and painted them green and red according to the color from the tree whose territory they exited. The point is that's this. I mean, this is more of a mountain range, but there's a giant green tree and a giant red tree. Like, we're talking, it's a mountain of a tree. And then there's a wall between them that keeps them apart. And it goes down into the earth. Out of nowhere, someone named Momo is speaking. They'd like to get together for a party, the trees, said Momo, not being keen in intellect, but owning an instinct where the well-being of the trees was concerned. They chose me, she said. Her thick brows met as it suddenly occurred to her that the monarchs had made a curious choice. I haven't seen you around here. Are you from the other side of Crake or Tedrin? So Momo is somebody who Creed meets when he goes all the way west to where the master trees are, the OG trees. And Momo is a human person who serves the trees like Garba. They aren't technically loyal to one tree or the other, but I'm spreading the love, I guess, with the colors of my notes here. So Momo serves the trees. Garba also serves the trees, and that's why he came to kill Creed. We don't quite know why, but Momo explains that the two giant trees want to touch so bad. They want to touch each other so bad, but they can't get through this wall, even though there are holes in the wall. Doesn't matter. Point is these humongo trees that have like atmospheric differences at different heights of their giantness want to touch each other so bad that they are growing their roots all the way around the earth the other direction because they can't touch through the wall. They're going to touch their roots on the other side of the planet. That's like their thing. And then humans humans love to dip in the trees. There's like a whole colony of people that live on the OG Tedron and the OG Crake that like serve the trees, kind of. And dipping into the trees is like information sharing. They're also addicted to it. They live in the trees. Like, they don't live on the ground. They have like ladders and society up in the trees. And what ends up happening is Creed excuse me, dips into OG Tedron. I apologize for the low life form accompanying me, said Creed to Tedron. It simply raced up at the last moment and leaped on me. See that it doesn't happen again. Do you love me? I loathe you and all your kind. All I love is Crake, and I know how exquisitely delightful it will be one day to meet him. I believe, Creed says, I believe some unique soul must be responsible for your existence. In my opinion, it was pure chance that put me here. However, there are times when I wonder if I'm an experiment gone wild. You mean you don't remember? Do you recall your experiences in the womb? It must have been a long time ago. Get rid of that beast so I can stop talking. You have no business collecting all this information. It won't do you a bit of good. Next time you dip, I'll erase it all from your mind, after which I'll pick your scant brain and maybe crush you a little. The next day, again accompanied by Glutton, Greed dipped in Crake. Take that animal away and I'll give you a squirt of chlorophyll. Oh, sorry, that doesn't appeal to you, does it? The trees were like two peas in a pod, practically identical in personality. Only on the outside were they different. Tedron, of course, is covered in green bark, and Crake in a vermilion, not at all rusty or dull, but a shiny, lustrous red. I have a love-hate relationship with Tedron, said the red growth. I long for and dread the thought of knowing him. My roots run a laborious race across the world, greedy and yet repulsed whenever they consider touching him. By the way, what is that animal doing in me? I never knew the inferior kingdoms could dip. So, basically Creed decides to leave because he's like, okay. And, what ends up happening is, basically the reveal is that the trees also kind of think that Neo is a Bool. And a Bool apparently was going to stop them. It's like the last bastion of uncorrupt humankind that isn't subjected to the trees. It's one of those things where if you think about it too much, doesn't make sense. And also if you think about it only a little bit, still doesn't make sense. But he starts to, he ends up managing to travel backward. It's quite a long way. I think eventually along the way he finds, is this when he refines Avenger? No, but he does eventually find his way. He ends up climbing the walls of the rock maze and making his way across to find his way back. Momo ends up getting pretty mad about him leaving. She wanted to marry him. Everybody wanted to marry Creed. And but he ends up leaving. He ends up escaping, and he ends up finding his way back to Neo after quite a long while. Apparently Drago has taken over the council because it was actually him who was supposed to be left the council position and not Creed when their mom died. Irrelevant. But Drago had imprisoned Jurgen for, I didn't write Jurgen's name down, poor thing, but Jurgen got like imprisoned, and then trees were being propagated. So that's what Drago did while Creed was gone. He basically was like, I'm going to make it so it's easier for us to get screwed over by the trees. But the council lets, he also banished the nomads, Guro and Terena's group. He ends up like sending them away. What ends up happening is Creed claims that he's going to kick Drago out of Neo, and Drago gets pretty upset about that, and he has Creed abducted by his men, and aware that Creed had found his way back home from a westerly direction, Drago had his men carry his brother north through the seemingly impassable mountain. Drago knew most of the nooks and crannies in the escarpment holding up the city, though he wasn't familiar with the terrain in the valley of fog behind the mountain. It was an insane and frightening place where even a drunk dared not venture. A place of hallucination, it was cut off. It was hallucinations, and visions, wailings, and other ghostly sounds. Drago knew that if Creed didn't come back from the fog right away, he probably wouldn't come back at all. So basically they take a cart and they shove it really hard into the fog, and he rolls in there, and then they leave. So Creed ends up stuck, and he can't go back toward Neo because the fog does start, screwing with him. And there's like a scary wind in the valley that like pushes him, and it pushes him along further and further away from Neo until we get to chapter 15. Alright, so chapter 15 starts with Guro and Terena believed Dio was a bull. So, I took a take of this already, so that's why stuff's written. But Dio, so Guro and Terena, when they got kicked out of Neo, they also ended up going north across the mountains and made a new place basically there's a Neo like emptied out on the other side of the mountain. There's an escarpment of houses and stuff. There's an empty brass bowl with holes at the bottom, waiting for living flesh, but it's kind of full of like dirty water right now because it's been abandoned. And they populated this new place and named it Dio. And Dio, they believe, is better, greater than Neo. So that's why I wrote that. However, there is that fog, and it is hallucinatory. It's clearly like making the Dions, they call themselves Neons, Neoans, I guess, and the Dioans, the Dions, whatever, are a little crazy because of the fog, but oh well. The problem is there is a thing that lives in the foggy marsh field things outside of the Valley of Dunes. Bones and other debris lay scattered about. There's a thing out in that valley outside of Dio called a croaker. I'm going to put that here. A croaker. Croaker. Yeah, croaker. And it is green and furry and has three limbs and a face on the underside of it. Do you know how much this thing is worse than the thing I pictured in my head? Because in my head it's a little Dr. Seussy. It's a little the Phantom Tollboothy. This, not so much. But there's a croaker out there, and it'll eat people. It'll fuck you up if you go out there. And its name is Dementia. I feel like there's some sort of message here with the names of these weird creatures, but I'm not looking into it. So, there's a Kroger out there called Dementia. They never fight it. They just let it kind of roll into town and have their way. And then it'll kind of go away. And then a different one will come out. Like the mates will take turns like guarding the cave or whatever they do. But there's no real fighting it for the Dions. But Creed suggests that they use flaming arrows and try to get rid of it. You know what I mean? Because otherwise they can't go out. They're like starving in their little escarpment, and they can barely eat because they don't have living flesh pool in their brass bowl. So he suggests that. The other big discovery that's super relevant here in Dio is named Jack. I'm going to put a little smiley by Jack. I guess it's not the happiest smiley. But Jack is basically this big machine. I have no idea how to describe this, so I'm just going to read it. 7 meters high, 5 meters wide, and as many meters deep, Jack was made of a silvery metal that didn't melt, rust, dent, scratch, scrape, or bear a mar of any kind. 4 meters up, a ladder built into her squat body was a seat that could accommodate a human rear. In front of the seat was a spoked wheel with a small dial in the center. Supposedly, the dial could be turned by moving the wheel. To Guro's knowledge, the wheel had never moved. Sticking out of the bottom of the seat was a narrow bore. A musical instrument, said Creed. Guro's look was full of scorn. I've been friends with Jack all my life. I hate to admit I don't know what she is, but I know what she isn't. She's old, I think. So? I was just wondering if she could have been made within the last several generations. Impossible. Not even our legends bear any reference to her. Why female and why Jack? As Guro had ready answers. At last, Guro had ready answers. At the top of the bore were 4 carved letters, J-A-C-K. As for the gender assigned to it, Guro's mother used to be Dio's leader. She was convinced that the machine was an important item in the universe, a mother of many factors, so she proclaimed it female. So, it turns out the invaders weren't actually random nomads. They came from a place on the other side of the mountain called Dio, that is just falling apart. And Jack lives outside of it. I say lives in quotes because it's just this metal thing. There's no image of it. There's no description. I would love a more detailed description. But it apparently has treads of some kind, because later on they talk about following the tracks. And Creed kind of gets obsessed with Jack. He tries to get her to move. There's a whole part where is it in this where Dementia chases him? Yeah. He runs out to Jack, and Dementia tries to get him, is trying to get him out of the seat, but because of her weird, her face is on the underside of her weird body, she can't fully, it's a whole thing. But he can't get Jack to move or respond or do anything. It just sits there. Jack, just sits there. But he agrees to help Dio. Greed kind of gets himself into their issues. He helps them kind of drive Dementia away. He agrees to clean out the bowl full of dirty water and stuff. And what he ends up doing is he goes back to Neo for supplies and kind of helps Dio get its shit together. He also convinces them to go plug up all the fog-producing holes, and it helps the Dions, think clearly. So that's a whole thing. So chapter 16 starts to kind of lean towards the final arc of the book, I guess, kind of. We're still talking at least half the book, so. But they end up capturing Garva. They finally find him. Creed ends up putting him in the bottom of the flesh pool for a while, in a suit to kind of, intimidate him. And this is what we find out. Garba was a spy sent by the giant patriarchs in the West. His father had been given the task of locating a bull. According to legend, some extraordinary place or thing was destined to rule the world, and this was an idea which the two giants were opposed. Garva's father had failed in his mission, and the son took up the search. Now he had come to Neo ahead of an invasion force. My orders were to kill the leader, he said to Creed. No hard feelings. So that's that. Avenger does come home. She does come home now that Creed is back in Neo. And Drago ends up getting basically kicked out of Neo because he tried to be, a dictator, and they didn't appreciate that. Drago ends up finding this nasty little tree. You know what? I'm going to use a different color for this nasty little tree that he finds. He finds this nasty little thing that was abandoned by both Tedrin and Crake. It's just this little, let's see. He dipped into a deformed tree named Grange. And, it sucks. Grange was basically, they were abandoned by Tedrin and Crake because they were nasty and gross, and basically the fog in that valley is what deformed Grange and the others, and because of that, Tedrin and Crake didn't want to have anything to do with Grange and the others in that valley, causing all of the trees in, near the valley to, die, which is what allowed Neo and Dio to stay isolated for so long, because like we established, the trees can communicate with each other, but there's basically this huge ring in that valley that has no trees. So there was no way for the trees to communicate. Now, Grange would love to inform on the Neons and the Dions. Neoins and Dioins, I don't know. I'm going to say Neons and Dions because it's funnier. So Grange, when Drago goes and dips into him, of course gives him all this information. And Grange knows about the other cities, but he can't do anything. So then he goes out there later. He gets kicked out. He dips into Grange. And then he comes back and he's like, I want to kill Grange. He sucks. And so Creed lets him. Then there's a night where a force of people comes to Neo with the intent of attacking everybody. They've got bows and arrows and spears. They come in the night, they come in stealth, no one knows, until the next morning when all their bodies are just dead in the rye field. There is tracks leading from the fog valley that resemble no man or beast. Some people blame dementia. They think the croaker did it. They think this thing did it. But Creed thinks it was Jack. He ends up following the furrowed trails that lead back across the valley, and they lead right to Jack. But she looks like she hasn't moved. She's exactly where she was always at, and Guro doesn't believe it. Guro's like, no, she hasn't moved in centuries, blah, blah, blah. Then, but he's convinced. He's convinced that it was Jack, that Jack somehow protected Neo. The next thing that ends up happening is a earthquake happens because Tedrin his roots are finally reaching close by. So they're trying to drive away these roots because as soon as the trees find out exactly where they are, they're going to fuck up the cities easily. And so Creed, in the beginning of the next chapter, chapter 17, decides to test Jack. Because he's like, I wonder what moved her. They didn't make any noise. They were silent when they came. The force of actual invaders, not Guro and Terena. But they came with the intention of harming Neo. And so what he does is he goes out into the rye field where those people were and starts thinking, I hate you, Neo, he thought aloud. He repeated the words. Leisurely and smoothly, he advanced towards the encamped enemy. How easy to kill you, he said. You're all fools. All poor dead fools. Tonight, everyone in this city dies by my hand. I'll spare no one. All neons are condemned. And he ends up focusing that. He ends up, thinking about it so hard that Jack shows up to kill him. It proves him right, but it straight up almost kills him. He has to, throw himself on the ground, being like, no, I'm from Neon. It was just a test, Jack. It was just a test. And Jack ends up leaving him alone. But in the morning, the tracks were plain to see. It had been real. Jack had interpreted his intent to harm Neo, had somehow picked his thoughts out of the air. Jack had come through the mountain trails to destroy him. He was lucky to be alive. He didn't get out of bed for 3 days. This is one of my favorite exchanges. I don't know why it cracks me up. I refuse to fetch your meals, said Drago. Why should I be your servant? Nobody asked you for anything, Creed roared. Get away from me. Get out of my room and don't let me see your face again. I can't recall you ever speaking to me like that, said Drago. Very well. I'll bring you some hot broth, but only this once. Siblings, am I right? So part of the peace that Creed is trying to create between Neo and Dio includes providing them more people. Because there's 20,000 people in Neo, but in Dio there's only 300, right? It was 270 or whatever that came with the group. So 300 adult female Neons volunteered to change their place of habitation and go live in Dio. Their purpose was to replenish the city's population. 30 Dion men were chosen on the basis of mental and physical health and willingness to take upon themselves the responsibility of 10 wives apiece. Each wife was assigned a large apartment with the understanding that she was expected to bear several children. I don't know, man. You gotta remember, this book was published in 1981, so, it's also set in this insane sci-fi future. So, I say sci-fi in quotes, there really hasn't been too much technology. So, they continue trying to plug up all the fog in the valleys. Pantori did at some point, get kicked out of the city, and he claimed he was going to go inform on people, go tell the trees, he did. He left the city, and people think he went to go tell the trees. That's what it is. Garba and Pantori must have drawn those trees 100 maps. You talk as if trees are human, said Creed. They could be 5 meters away and not actually know we're here. And you're wrong about Pantori. He wouldn't tell on us. Which is crazy that Creed, defends Pantori from slander when Pantori and him have just been beating the shit out of each other for a while. Creed continues trying to get Jack to, move, and it does not work. Somebody kidnaps Darva. We don't know who, but they imply that they know who it was. That's one of the things. He had to know what he was doing. He watched us to learn our patterns and came when the guard went to wake up her relief. Darva was sleeping on the other side of the camp, so it was easy for him to grab her and get away. I think he must have drugged her or hit her because she didn't make a sound. The tracks were playing and we both know who it was. I'd love to be informed. Do we mean Garba? Do we mean Pantori? There's a lot of assumed development of character relationships. The next kind of big event that takes up several pages, or at least the rest of the the rest of this bit, is that Creed heads up a detail to go find the next route that comes sniffing their way. But also he wants to find Darva. Because why not? She's just trying to exist. And they find this huge route trying to, like, stretch across a valley. It's, like, huge. The valley's huge. It's the whole thing. But Creed ends up, like, assigning people, like, okay, you five, think of a way that we can get rid of this route without accidentally making it, crash the whole valley. Because the valley, I think, is, like, partially connected to the mountains that they're in. That Neo and Dio are in. Because that's what they're trying to do is... that's what the big Tedrin and Crake are trying to do. They're trying to find Neo and Dio. And then Creed decides to head out and look for Darva. And he ends up finding Pantori. So Pantori is the one who abducted Darva. No, Pantori, Darva. So it took him 3 days to find Pantori, or rather Pantori located him by simply sitting back and waiting, which I think, that's so funny. So what ends up happening is Pantori kicks his ass, and Pantori's like, you haven't been recognized. One day I'll get Savager, Divida, and Walakanset, bind them together, and put them in Drog's nest. Drog was an amphibian who filled the night air with music. You will never hear about Drog ever again. So Pantori, leaves Creed tied up in camp. He talks to Darva and he's like, hey, are you okay? And she's like, he wants me to join him here, become a wild woman and raise wild little children. But Pantori ends up saying, you're a dead man. First you'll go crazy, then you'll die, blah, blah, blah. Morchella is waiting for you. She's going to appreciate you, and I think you'll go for her in a big way. He doesn't know what the heck Morchella is. We don't know what the heck Morchella is yet, either. Where's that dark blue? I'm going to use that again. But he says Morchella. So then it turns out that Morchella is like big fungi. And like all the other plant... What is going... I don't even know where these hairs are coming from. Oh, and this is... It's crazy town up here. Morchella... Let's add this to the list over here where all the plants are. Morchella is a fungus thing, and Creed gets sucked into her. Basically, he is forcibly dipped into Morchella in the beginning of Chapter 18, and a big chunk of Chapter 18 is him being stuck in Morchella. Now, the problem with Morchella, unlike Tedrin and Crake, who have one single mind and then they suckle on your mind and can wipe your mind and give you pleasure and stuff, Morchella apparently has two minds, and one mind holds information, and one mind processes information, but she can't unite them without a third mind stuck in the middle. So that's what happens to him. He gets all fucked up by basically being her subconscious for quite a long time. He's stuck in there. But when he gets pulled in, he keeps one hand out. For as long as it takes, he keeps that hand out. And eventually Glutton, his kick, Glutton finds him and pulls him out of Morchella. And then, she dips in a little bit to kind of upset Morchella's little process, and then pulls Creed out, and saves him. And then, they go back to Neo. Neo then donates a mold and some living flesh and stuff for Dio to start up their thingy in Dio. They also take a big chunk of living flesh to the big root that's trying to cut through that valley and destroy it. He didn't end up saving Darva, though, because apparently after letting Morchella suck Creed up, Darva and Pantori took Darva and left. So they end up wanting to go find Darva again, and they end up basically coming upon him when he's asleep and knocking him out, and they bind him up and end up dumping him into this. There's a silver lake. Things just get introduced. I told you this book is nuts. And they just dump him in there, and they rescue Darva. Grange. So then these paragraphs, it just straight up, there's just like a paragraph break, and then some new craziness happens. Grange learns to walk. It's a deformed little tree. Can go ahead and start a walking, and betrays them to the patriarchs. tells Tedrin and Crake where they are and everything. But what they end up finding out is that I guess that doesn't happen quite yet, but I'm pretty sure it is the next reveal. Yep. So that's what happens. So Creed and Guro. Yep. All right. So Jack is protecting the crap out of Neo and Dio. Jack killed more than 1,000 warriors. But then Creed implies that they should turn her off because she's killing all these people, and I'm like, I'm sorry, she's protecting y'all. I don't know why all of a sudden he's like, I can't stand the slaughter. I'm like, bro, she's saving your lives. But because he doesn't want more people to be slaughtered, which I guess is a good thing. I'm trying to see it. I also am like, your people deserve to live. I don't know, man. But Creed and Guro go out with their own little battle to fight instead of waiting for them to come here and get slaughtered by Jack. And then they get captured. They get captured and brought all the way west back to Tedrin and Craig. I don't know. And so there's a group of them who ends up getting attacked or kidnapped and being forced to dip into the OG Tedrin and Craig for quite a long time. And then the problem is that whenever he asks questions, they won't tell him anything. But also, they don't know a lot of things. He tries to ask about Jack's origins, and Tedrin doesn't know. Tedrin didn't know Jack's origins and didn't care. As a matter of fact, the subject annoyed him, though he claimed otherwise. Yeah. Somebody had managed to put one over on him by constructing the machine behind his back. So there's that. And Momo, who is so happy to see Creed back, keeps trying to marry him, and he's like, I need a volunteer to marry Momo, because he doesn't want to. Everybody is being forced to dip, but Creed, Wallaconset, Scavenger, Divida, and Guro are all immune to becoming addicted. Why? They don't know. But what ends up happening is they do find a special, Drago finds a special grass that he starts eating. And it makes it so he can't dip. Not that, like, he won't, but, like, he can't. Like, physically, it's just like if I, in this universe, touched a tree. I can't just into it. You just can't dip. So everybody starts eating the grass, and they end up, at some point, getting Momo and forcing her to eat the grass, and she gets upset because she's obsessed with these trees. This is her whole life. And the trees ordered some slaves to kidnap Momo and hide her until the effects of the drug wore off. This was done, and in 2 weeks' time, she was back on duty. And so, they threatened to starve them. But then they eventually escape. They end up escaping the trees because they get one over on Momo. It all happens very quickly. Like, even though this chapter seems long, we're talking 6 pages. Like, chapter 19, where they get, you know, he doesn't want Jack to kill anybody, and then they get captured, and then they get brought to the trees, and then they find the grass. All of this is 6 pages. So, it happens pretty quick. They end up marching south, and they say, we'll go home in the spring, or at least they'll try. And then, the end of this chapter, out of nowhere. So, it's like, there were sheep with long fur, blah, blah, blah. So now it's the spring, because he said they'd travel back to Neo in the spring. Let me read this last bit to you, because it's just sort of a gender experience that I think queer people can understand. In the spring, Pantori, remember who they dumped in that weird pool? Pandori came down from the north and met them as they traveled toward Neo. A great many in the group were inspired to take off at a fast clip and left their slower comrades behind, because Pandori's been a fucking menace. I have no hard feelings toward humankind because I am no longer one of them, said the big blonde, who is Pandori. He took Creed by the arm, gazed into his eyes. His own were exactly like diamonds. You people look so much alike that I can hardly tell you apart. He stepped back. What do you think of my circulatory system? It's so obvious. Having been lusterless for most of his life, Pantori was now brilliant. Literally, he was a walking jewel. His outer surface was so clear and transparent that his innards were visible. Ribs twinkled here, organs there. Pantori turned to the sun and became blinding light, bent to the shade and glistened like pure water, smiled and dazzled onlookers with his expensive teeth. Don't call me Pantori, he said. My name is Crescent. You have nothing to fear from me. I'm innocent. I'm also a little bit omnipotent. You've never seen anything like me. I'm fucking obsessed with Crescent and that whole attitude. That'll change a little later, but for now, we ain't dead naming Crescent anymore. Crescent. And I'm going to give it a little, Crescent. So the next chapter, they are making ready for war. Creed is trying to get Jack to move. Nothing's really happening. They keep using Pantori, but I'm going to call him Crescent. Crescent and 6 fair ladies dance daily in the rye field in the full view of the sun. Their skin begins to Their skin seems to be beginning to glow or something. Because he touched each of these ladies on the forehead. That touch with his finger meant more than we thought. So, Crescent is turning some 6 ladies into beings like him, kind of, something like that. The other thing that happens in this chapter is Creed had gotten some seeds earlier and planted them. One of them turned into a Morchella that they dump in Dementia's territory to kill. And then the other turns into a fluffy parasite that Drago starts wearing around his neck like a muff. I just report the news, man. I mean, I do write, but this is on another level. Crescent. Crescent is, kind of keeping these 6 women to himself, which, whatever. But they end up disappearing into the pool. And when they all come out, they are all made of glitter and they are all diamond people. But they get pretty mad at Crescent for this. And what they end up doing is they kidnap Crescent and the women, and they basically tell him, no, you're not going to do all this. And Crescent is like, don't infringe on my rights. And they deny them water because supposedly they're plants. And Crescent, he's like, I'm Crescent. So they deny them water, and they begin to kind of like wilt and dull. I'm Crescent, he howled, his tongue swollen, his eyes bleary. It was so pleasant. Who wants to be human? Tell me about it, man. And then he's like, fine, I will leave the women alone. I'll take my woman and go. Which one will that be? Darva. That's the one hanging far back away from you as far as she can get. I reckon you can leave with anyone who wants to go with you. This is a free country. And then it says, Crescent headed west alone, and the others went back home. I feel kind of bad for Crescent. He's just trying to express his new weird body, I get it. But yeah, I think that's kind of the last you ever hear from Crescent. Creed, however, continues to obsess over Jack. Really wants Jack to be near Neo instead of outside of Dio, even though she's protecting them both. But he's sitting on her. He's like, come on, go, Jack, go. But nothing happens. Except as soon as he is about to get up, a root bursts up to, like, attack the city. And she, and, what is it? Creed started to get out of Jack's seat, but was knocked back down into it as she made an unexpected move. She darted forward 3 meters and fired a beam of light that lopped off the root at the place where it jutted from the ground. While the dead appendage was falling, she gave it another bright torch that turned it into a pile of ashes. Atta girl, Creed yelled. Don't stop. Take me to Neo where you belong. And so she does. She starts just zooming across the valley. And Dementia is like, what the hell is that in my territory? And like jumps on top of it and ends up like hitching a ride for a little while, but it doesn't last. Like Dementia can't hold on. So she jumps down off of it. And then Jack starts speeding towards a lake. And Creed is like, no, don't go in the lake because you'll sink. Because of course you will. She's a gigantic metal machine. And so he jumps off before she makes it to the lake. And he's like, stupid. Oh no, I've ruined everything. And then she comes out the other side and keeps going toward Neo. And he's like, oh no. So he has to like run. And he can't catch up. It's way too fast. But but now it lives in the valley just outside of Neo. That's it. That's all. Like, that's all that really happens. Garba starts turning into a tree in the next chapter. And, that's, this, I'm pretty sure. Yep. That's what it is. So, that Morchella that Creed had accidentally grown that they threw into Dementia's territory ended up propagating and going west and basically becoming another agent of the Patriarchs. So the OG Tedrin and Crake, the Morcellas are now working for them, and they come and they basically express the revelation that the Morcellas make it clear that what Tedrin and Crake want are the leaders. They want the council members. They want the people who are resistant to the addiction, the things that had gotten mentioned before. So, Crescent notwithstanding, Scavenger, Wall of Consent, Divida, Creed, and I think also Lexia ends up involved. Yeah. So the council members leave. And what they do is they leave super far from Neo and they go like all the way around and they end up hiding in the trees because they're so freaking huge. This is the cool part where they get to describe oh, I skipped forward again. Okay. They being the council members were somewhere in the upper reaches of Tedrin the Great, trying to survive a tropical storm. They hadn't chosen their camp in the big tree with any logic, but simply aimed north, climbed ladders and scaled niches and cracks eastward until they came to a plateau bulwarked with foothills. In this tree. Remember, they're in Tedrin. In fact, the plateau was the beginning of a branch, while the foothills were knobby bumps leading to the start of another branch. That's how freaking huge these trees are. For Tedrin, life was a matter of sensations, in parts of himself. He not only took nourishment from the ground and thereby made a desert of most of the surrounding continent, but he also took it from the atmosphere. It was important to him to create different types of weather at different levels. Near to the ground, he liked things warm and relatively dry. It didn't harm him because his roots were able to provide him with plenty of water from wherever he cared to extract it. Farther up his body and eastward, he liked plenty of snow. Above this, the weather was tropical and safer for dippers than the snow below or the cold rainforest above. Whatever lay above that was a mystery, since no one had been there and returned to talk about it. So they're living in the upper reaches of Tedrin. And then what they do is they have somebody go down to meet with an informant who keeps them abreast of the news going on in Neo and Dio. And then climb back up. But the problem is it takes a week to climb down and then climb back up. So they end up trying to build a slide. And then they make socks and gloves out of cotton balls plucked from growths on the tree. Creed ends up helping a random old woman who's trying to dip in the upper reaches. He shares the nuts and fruit with her to to make her feel, to help her, just because he's a good person. And there's a part where she's like, where is it? Oh, there's such a funny, yeah. This is the old lady. I don't have to live up here to satisfy that, the addiction to dipping. Say, what's wrong with you anyhow, doing favors for a stranger? And there's so many moments of dialogue that are so hilarious. Just the way the back and forths happen are just, it's so human. I will say that's the funniest part about this insane book, is that all the characters feel real. Yeah, I kind of get it. Crescent, I get it, bro. Let me just go emerge from a pool with 6 hot ladies made of diamonds, and don't call me human anymore because I'm not human. I am only Crescent. I get it. So now we're on chapter 22, and we're kind of towards the end of the book. And I will say, when I was doing my second read through, I got about this far and then decided I had to make this video. I don't care how long it is. I don't care if it's boring. This is my cry for help to the universe that someone else needs to know about this other than my best friend who had to deal with me we're like at a Comic-Con and I keep being like, hey, stop what you're doing. Stop looking at these cool art and like, stop whatever. I need to read you this crazy passage. And he's like, all right, like, what is he going to do about it? Moving a dog toy out of the way of my feet before I make a horrible squeaky noise. Yeah, this is about as far as I got before I was like, I have to make this video because I'm losing my mind. But in my first read through, I remember what ends up happening is they eventually go to the very top of the trees. Some other stuff. I remember it getting pretty slow once they get into the trees. They certainly have been there for kind of a while. So we'll see how this ends together again. Okay. So there's a chapter or so of them kind of like living in the tree and climbing all the way to the top. So they find there's like a level in the desert where they there are like these bugs that come out and eat everything except for like the tree. They're like flesh-eating bugs. Him and Scavenger hang out a lot. Scavenger's the one with the real bad claustrophobia, so he talks about it, but it saves them from the bugs at some point. And then they climb to the very top where it's like heavenly. Everything is perfect, it's beautiful, but it's like empty. And so they realize that the only people who get to come to the top are the people that, Tedrin and Crake want to kill. And then, in the longest chapter of the book, I swear, or maybe it just feels like the longest chapter. I guess it's like two chapters. So anyway, through all of that, they find out that Crescent, General Pantori Crescent, apparently, is like working for the trees now, or is on the trees looking for them. Because it turns out, eventually, Creed ends up finding Divida or Darva. I think both of them are involved because they're both mentioned heavily. And Pantori captures him. And it turns out that Crescent isn't Pantori. Crescent is another living alien fungus creature who is like, that is like made of diamond fungus. And for several pages, Crescent has been looking for a ghoul and believes the ghoul might be in the tree, but captures Creed and is like demanding his information. It's so strange. She keeps claiming she doesn't care. She doesn't care, and she cannot be moved by any of his attempts to, convince her to let him go, convince him that he doesn't want to be there. I know. Papa's been talking too long. But Crescent really wants to find a ghoul. And so Creed ends up kind of in a logic, like a back and forth logic, wrestle with her. And basically convinces Crescent that there is no Abul. And it really kind of drives Crescent crazy. The chapter is very interesting. There's so many kind of back and forth moments between Creed and Crescent that aren't that aren't very clear. It's kind of the philosophy section, I guess. Where's the yeah, just, and Darva is stuck inside Crescent too. It's a very interesting thing. Crescent is, like, it turns out, like, even longer lived than Tedrin and Crake, but also is kind of like this million old, I don't know. Creed goes on, like, you know, the part in the actual book of it where I almost called him Will because I know his name is William, but William Denbrough. But Bill, when Bill is actually having the cosmic, metaphysical, psychological mind fight with it, it's almost like that, except way more Star Trek-y. Now it was his turn to lead into memory. Actually, hang on, let me back up a little further. We blame you for my being bothered. I never heard those scenes interpreted before by a human mind. Are you really grief-stricken when you contemplate the desert created by Tedrin and Crake? Tell me why. Why bother, he said. You're a blank slate with no experience. Nothing means anything to you because you aren't living. Surely you don't believe that. Surely you don't believe that, he mimicked. What are you, Crescent, but an intruder in a conflict that doesn't concern you? Which conflict is that? The one of intelligent organisms seeking happiness. It's the only conflict worthwhile. What is good, she said. What is evil? What is the difference whether a thing feels good or suffers? If it has an end, what difference does it make what happens to it along the way? Now it was his turn to lead her into memory, except that he merely served as the inspiration, while Crescent unfolded portions of her vast knowledge. Children were born and died, or they were born and lived a short time, and then they died. Circumstance slaughtered hundreds, thousands, millions, because for a moment or a minute they were ill, clumsy, foolhardy, stupid, or incompetent. Floods drowned them, fire scorched them, hail flattened their crops and caused them to starve, earthquakes crushed them, volcanic eruptions buried them, and after all this the remnants quarreled over insignificant things and went to war. Laughter was like the beat of a drum, sporadic and astonishing. Weeping was more common because it was that kind of world, chancy and insecure. Weeping was more common because it was that kind of world, chancy and insecure, with no sure bets and nothing guaranteed. Inventors invented, writers scrawled, artists daubed, farmers planted, thieves stole, idlers loafed, and none of it lasted beyond brief lifetimes. Each new generation started afresh and trod the same treadmill, for that was the purpose of their being there in the first place, to make their tracks. I'm sorry, were we not just talking about dipping in a tree? Like, the Crescent portion of the book feels so slow and so long. I need you to understand, I stood here for like 20 minutes just getting through like 10 pages. Which, I guess that doesn't sound like too much. It's like 2 minutes a page. But for me, that's slow. So, yeah. Creed ends up managing to get out because he... I know a few things, Creed said to Crescent. For instance, I could take Darva and leave here right now. Do you know why I won't? Because you have plans for me. Why do I bother to talk to you when you know everything about me? Anyway, you have been made to care. Made? Showed. Taught. Why? Because you exist. You should enjoy it. This is the motive behind all your odd behavior, she said. By nature, you aren't a whiner, yet you've done little besides whine since Pantori brought you here. Contrasts, remember? How can you know cold unless you know hot? How can you appreciate heaven if you haven't been in hell? And how can I enjoy peace unless I hear obnoxious complaining? And so, like, there's like this logic fight for that whole bit. And then they manage to escape, and Crescent is sort of like reborn. She's this alien, I keep saying fungus, but she like thrives, but she's not alive in the way that we know living. That whole thing, this zit on my forehead has become more obvious the more stressed this book has made me. And so apparently Abul doesn't exist, so the Earth is doomed, and Creed gets depressed about it. They're trying to escape Tedrin. They're trying to climb down out of the tree, and they find Garba like stuck in the tree, but they couldn't. They can't. They can't get him out. The tree is inside of him, and they don't want to kill him, so they escape. They go to the ground. So then they get all the way to the ground, and Creed decides it's wrong to leave Pantori there. So he ends up climbing all the way back up and tries to... Pantori ends up like throwing him into Crake. So now he's on the red tree. And Crake like they read, or Craig like reads his mind and everything. But then Creed basically sours the like weird obsession they have with each other by suggesting to Craig that Tedrin is bigger than him. And so Craig gets really pissed about it, and the Creed dips Pantori into the pool with Crescent in order to try and save him. And because he does that, Pantori is like made intelligent of the fact that Tedrin and Craig like destroyed the rest of the human race. Like is made aware of the truth. There's like a battlefield somewhere at the very top, somewhere near the top of the tree that like there's corpses, and that's what those weird little flesh bugs feast on. It's a whole thing. And Pantori like regrets everything. Him and Creed travel slowly together back home. Pantori like was in love with Darva. The last pages are so strange to read because it's almost like you're reading a different language. Your brain has been reprogrammed by reading this whole book. The patriarchs, then they escape the patriarchs, and Creed is oh man, Creed like melds into a Morchella on purpose and convinces the Morchella, like he stays inside of her and like convinces her to climb. Yeah, he uses her to like climb up the tree. The whole time that he's stuck inside of her, she's like using his brain, and then she has to put his brain back together. And I had to put your psyche back together again because I used you up too fast getting out from under the tree, she said. In the process of fitting patterns together, I came across a slight warp in your neural structure. You had no right. If it bothers you, I'll redo it the way it was. You know I won't let you. It wouldn't matter anyway, she said. The alteration I performed in your head would have occurred naturally sometime within the next several months, or possibly years. What's the difference? It's like having a personality overhaul. One little synapse? How does it feel to care so much about your species? It hurts. He held his head. It hurts. And so it's a whole thing. And then we finally come to chapter 26, the very last chapter. And I'll recount that in a second. All right. So the last chapter involves, so he was like changed. Creed was changed by his encounter with Crescent. What is the purpose of caring about the world, giving a shit? And then Morchella fixed a thing in his brain that kept him from caring, which apparently everybody has. And that is part of the problem. They, didn't care. That was part of why Neo just had, the same problems every now and then, and nothing really changed, nothing really mattered, nothing really happened. Which is why they were all super confused for quite a long time. So he ends up, so he comes back to Neo, all changed, and he suddenly can control Jack, because he actually cares. He has to care all the way. That's the way he says it. What is the principle that controls Jack? You have to care all the way. It isn't easy because we aren't dedicated to anything and never have been. I don't know any other way to explain it to you. So he cares all the way now. And Guro tries to stop him from taking Jack one last try. And he gets on Jack and he takes Wallaconsett with him. And they ride Jack all the way to the trees with the intent of using Jack to destroy the trees, because the trees want to destroy humanity and everything. And as they're going along the way, "I'm getting through," Wallaconsett yelled. "I'm beginning to understand. I care about what happens to the world." "Not now," Creed shouted. "Leave her alone, otherwise she'll be confused." And so what happens is he is trying to order Jack to kill the green tree, and Wallaconsett is ordering her to kill the red tree, and she can't do either one because she's being forced to do it at the same time. So what does Jack destroy? The wall that's between them. And then there's such a great, they finally get to touch. Tedrin and Crake finally get to touch. And they're like, oh, I like it. And they end up smooshing all over each other for quite a long time. There's a great sentence of, the bad weather had ceased and the objects were no longer dropped from the trees, for they were too busy loving each other with embraces that would soon turn more passionate. Tedrin seemed to be slightly tilted off balance toward the left as Crake slipped his branches through those of his green neighbor and tugged. Tedrin took great armfuls and did the same. Here's the great sentence. There was much to be gained from hugging. Somewhere during the next few days, the embracing became a contest. The one who did the most infiltrating would learn the most about the opposition. Wait, where had that last concept come from? It didn't belong. There was no opposition here, only a seeking to excel. Another inappropriate word. Wasn't it odd how the mind sometimes worked? This strange brother was here to be examined and conquered for the first time in years. Wait, somewhere in the last phrase was a dangerous concept. So intense were the thoughts and needs of Tedrin and Crake that they were broadcast on the earthly air. They panted, gasped, strained, concentrated on reaching out with all their arms to stop the other from tightening his stranglehold. It was difficult to breathe. Each suffered from many raw places that were being attacked by bacteria. Infestations of insects and fowl were no longer maintained discipline, but turned on their hosts and committed atrocities. Time meant more disaster, less breathing space in which to hope for withdrawal and release, or even to think about it, less opportunity to find a way out. A great green branch writhed as a great red branch wound about it and bore down. Both trees leaned at 20-degree angles. Their top branches were like braided hair. No eye could trace the ins and outs of this particular hug. The more one tree pulled with top branches, the closer he could get in order to use his mightier arms situated lower down. Finally, the upper war was accomplished. The strongest branches engaged in a hug that left no air or space between the two main trunks. Strength was diverted to this section while loose parts slapped, tugged, pulled, yanked, and carried on in an aggressive manner. The trunks bruised one another. Occasionally, Crake grunted. Now and then, Tedrin did the same. Grunt, embrace, hug more tightly, reach with the fingers, and clamp upon any protuberance. It would be months before all movement ceased. Then the only action would be in simple growth, but eventually that would also come to a halt. Of equal strength, the trees had one another so tied up they couldn't gasp. Once in a while, one managed a weak groan. They couldn't eat, couldn't drink, could scarcely think of anything but pain. Their roots were pulled out of shape. One day, these two would come out of the ground and grapple with one another. When that happened, the patriarchs would be totally dead. Creed and Wallaconset stayed in the desert long enough to be certain of the outcome. And then Creed says he's not going back. He tells Wallaconset to, take charge of Neo. And then Jack ends up deciding not to pursue past the top of the mountain that Neo is on. And Creed sets off with Avenger and Glutton into the world. He tries to speak to a tree, but the tree is just a normal fucking tree now. The last lines are, as Creed walked across the world, flowers and grass sprang up. He wasn't in any hurry. He was looking for a bull, and he wouldn't find it overnight. And that's the end of the book. That's the end of this crazy book. So there you go. Now you've heard this story too. I hope this video is as long as it feels like it is. I'm starving. I need to go eat some fucking lunch. And my dogs definitely have to pee. So I hope you enjoyed that. Don't expect more of this. This book in particular is kind of special for its chaos and craziness. And also because it means a lot to me because I got it at the first con I was able to drag my best friend to. He hadn't been to a con before. It was a whole thing. Anyway. But yeah, there you go. Here's another video of me talking. It's honestly been too much. I won't be doing this again anytime soon. So we'll be back to our silent videos once this is up. I already know what book I want to read next. Under Tokyo Umbrellas by Rowan Alexandria Bennett. That book I mentioned in the... Anyway, I'm going to read that next, and I dropped it.